Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, Liverpool, they win again. Is this their best chance to win the title since 1990? Fergie's back. Sir Alex Ferguson was in the stands yesterday at Old Trafford, but Manchester United, they could only limp to a 1-1 draw with Wolves. And the FIFA Awards, they take place in a glittering ceremony in London tomorrow night. Modric, Ronaldo and Salah, they're all on the shortlist. But where is Eden Hazard? Here to tell us the star turns this morning, Matt Dickinson is the chief sports writer at The Times. Charlie Wyatt is football editor at The Sun. Jason Burt is the chief football correspondent at The Daily Telegraph. Morning, guys. Good to see you, because I was with the fight with you last night, Dicko, so thanks for joining us.
Yep.
Bit bleary-eyed this morning, but we're here.
What, me or you?
Me, not you. You look bright as a button, as ever. Don't forget, though, you can tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on your screen over the next 90 minutes. OK, let's have a look at some of the papers then. It's not just about Anthony Joshua and that win last night at Wembley. It's about this man, the Sunday Times, the front page. Fergie is back to acclaim yesterday at Old Trafford. He was back in the stands to watch his team, the team he won 13 Premier League titles with. Will they win another one, though, under Jose Mourinho? Not on yesterday's performance. He's not happy with that 1-1 draw with Wolves. Jose lets rip, accusing his stars of lacking the will to win. Big win for them in the Champions League in the week, but accusing them of only being at 30% yesterday at Old Trafford. That's on the back page of the Sunday People as well. He's red raw, fuming. Jose moans, "I don't like the way that my team approached that game." He's every right to be upset. This man isn't, though. He's happy. 6 in a row in the Premier League, 600th game as a manager. It's Jurgen Klopp. That's the Sun's goals pull out this morning. Some transfer news in the Sunday Mirror this morning. It's Frankie de Jong. De Jong that I want. Great headline. And that's the man that Manchester City want. Pep Guardiola wants to sign him from Ajax, a rising star in world football. Andy Dunn's column. No matter how many turned up in midweek to watch Manchester City, they lost in the Champions League against Lyon, of course. But all City fans care about is how many medals that they win in May. Good win for City yesterday, bouncing back to win 5-0 at Cardiff City. Sam Wallace's column, always a must-read. Arsenal, they wouldn't expect to lose a player to Milan. Why are they losing their chief executive, Ivan Gazidis, who confirmed this week that he will leave Arsenal to join Milan in December. We'll talk about that in part 5 of today's programme, as well as other matters. Manchester City, Tottenham, Chelsea, they're all coming up, and Liverpool in a few moments' time. We're actually going to start the show today because one of our colleagues, Ralph Ellis, it was announced last week that he had passed away last weekend at the age of 62. And he's someone that everybody on this table knew and worked with. Former chief football writer at the Daily Star. Worked at the Sunday Mirror as well, most recently at the Daily Mail, Dick. And he's someone that you knew when you were first coming through as a young reporter, as a young journalist.
It certainly was, and someone you looked up to as a guy and also as a reporter. I remember when it first came in, and he was, you know, there's always that competition, particularly around the England team, as we all know, and who can get it. And I remember Ralph just being one of those guys who was relentlessly enviable contacts. And I guess we've seen. I never understood where he was getting it from, and that shows his discretion. And I saw there was a lovely tribute actually from Neil Warnock in the Cardiff programme yesterday, where he said Ralph was one of those guys, off the record meant off the record. I think he was trusted by a lot of people. I think we've seen that in all the tributes that we've heard for him this week, not just from guys in our trade, but from actually within the game of football. Ralph was hugely respected as a reporter, but more importantly as a bloke. Yeah,
he certainly was. He fought a long battle with the customary courage and class and dignity. His long battle, Charlie, with prostate cancer, but it was something that he didn't dwell on and he didn't talk about and didn't particularly highlight.
No, he didn't, and he still had that great sense of humour. Great bloke. I saw him recently. Last time was at Swansea. But the thing with Ralph, other than having great contacts, he had perfected the art of asking a difficult question in a good way, in a way that got a good answer out of managers. And we all know that's not easy. And I think sometimes supporters, and maybe even those in the offices, don't realise how difficult that is at times. And you knew, when I walked into a press room and I saw Ralph in there, I knew that there's someone there who, at the end, would be going to the manager, going to the players afterwards, and we'd be all right, and we'd get a good answer. And that I'll always remember. Ralph's just a brilliant asker of questions.
Yeah, he certainly was. Incredibly passionate guy as well. He loved his job. Very, very committed to the profession as well. If you'd like to know more about prostate cancer, go to the website, visit the website, prostatecanceruk.org/football. We were just talking about Ralph Ellis, who passed away at the age of 62 last weekend. OK, let's move on to talk Liverpool now. Big win for them yesterday. Another big win. 6 in a row now for them in the Premier League, Matt. Another win for them in the Champions League when, of course, they were dragged back by Paris Saint-Germain in the week. Graham Souness in the papers this morning says this is their best chance. This is the best chance since 1990 to go on to win that elusive crown, to be crowned champions again, to be the best team in English football. Are they heading in that direction? Are they there?
I think they are. I mean, I guess Brendan Rodgers might have something to say about whether it's the best chance since that long ago, given how close they came, slipping from their grasp, as we all famously recall. But yeah, I mean, they're as equipped as they can be. I think they've sorted out the goalkeeper, they've sorted out the defence. Obviously, midfield options now are huge. They're bringing Naby Keita, and he looks a tremendous signing, and yet he is being rotated. They can afford to rotate him. I guess if there is a question, I mean, I did the piece with Gary Neville a couple of weeks ago where he suggested that the way Liverpool play, the front three, there's a certain risk of fatigue with them, and that come February, March, April, that may catch up with them. Now, that's obviously to be seen. I know it was a view that didn't go down particularly well with Jurgen Klopp himself, but it's a view, and you can understand it. I mean, it's Liverpool's way of playing is full on, and it will be interesting to see, because in midfield they've got options to rotate. Those front three are pretty much, in their quality, I think, sort of feel irreplaceable. So that's the sort of question over it. But yeah, I mean, if you're a Liverpool fan, you're as excited as you've been since 1990, or maybe since that game when they were, before kick-off against Chelsea. Yeah.
You saw them in the midweek, Charlie, in the Champions League. Did they show that the intensity when they started the game? Of course, they had such intensity, but Paris Saint-Germain came back into it. But then they showed the desire to go on to win the game.
Look, in previous seasons, I'm not sure they'd have got that winning goal, and that's the beauty of Liverpool. They don't know when to give up. The players are improving. I think it's exciting, players like Gomez and Alexander-Arnold who are just getting better. Daniel Sturridge, I'm amazed he's still at the club, and he could still be important. I mean, I agree with what Matt's saying. Those front three are their front three, but Sturridge is there. Solanke, Gareth Southgate's always raving about. He's there as well. So I really hope that Liverpool can stay up there. They're unfortunate to a degree that Manchester City are playing, because in previous seasons, when maybe Chelsea won the title, when Leicester won the title, that Liverpool side would probably be favourites. But I think, I hope they'll last the distance, because we can't have another season like last year. As good as Manchester City were, you don't want a title that's over by March, and it was last year, wasn't it?
Yeah. Liverpool leading from the front, Jace.
Yeah.
What's changed? What's different? Is there anything different?
I think there's a lot different, actually. Even from last season, I think they're playing differently. I take Matt's point about the full-on approach, but actually I think they're not doing that so much now. I think they're actually picking their moments a little bit more. It's not quite just full-on attack and trying to overwhelm teams. I think they obviously do that, but they're a little bit more. They're obviously much more defensively solid. That's basically a new defence from this time last year, and obviously a new goalkeeper. So there's a very different approach in that. Midfield-wise, they're much more defensively strong as well. So suddenly it looks like a different proposition as a team. And I think one of the things that's pleasing them most is the number of clean sheets they're getting. Now, yesterday, they obviously won very comfortably. Didn't you have a shot in the second half? They didn't really create that many chances second half against Southampton, but they were already ahead. They already won the game. Last year, they would have kept going to try and score more goals. I think they've almost grown up a little bit as a team. I think you see a lot more maturity in the way they play, and they know how strong they are, and they know what they've got. And obviously the big difference now, when you can bring Firmino, obviously he would have started if his eye was 100% right, but he didn't even start against Paris Saint-Germain. Last season they couldn't bring somebody like Firmino off the bench. They didn't have that quality. as Matt says, they've plugged all the gaps in the team and in the squad. You know, Shaqiri coming in as well makes a difference. Suddenly it looks a much more dangerous proposition, but much more formidable proposition as well. They're not going to lose matches the way they maybe would have lost matches before, because they're not quite as gung-ho as they were before. I think it's a very, very different team. And I think that's why, I think that's the heart of Graham Souness's point, is that actually you look at them now, and as brilliant as they were last season, there were chances where they could obviously lose games. Now you look at them thinking they're going to be very, very hard to beat.
And also there's a pragmatism, I think, to them as well, because you can imagine they're winning games with 60% of possession, but they can win games with 30 or 40% as well. They're in some ways, you know, that adaptability is key. I mean, Manchester City have their style, and it's, you know, obviously Guardiola tinkers, but ultimately you know that they want how they want to dominate the ball. But with Liverpool, they can win 2 or 3 different ways. I mean, I think City's clearly are still the team to catch, but Liverpool are equipped better than ever to do so.
They've got such huge history in English football, but also on the continent as well, Charlie, with the 5 European Cups. Last season they got to the final. Would Klopp prioritise? Do you get any sense at all that he would prioritise the Premier League, for example, this dream of winning the title again, the first in 28 years, be 29 years by the time we get to May, of course? Or will they just, as the season progresses, that's when they'll make decisions?
I think it's got to be the league still, isn't it? You know, as impressive as they were in the Champions League, and you don't know how they'll do. They're in a difficult group. I think Liverpool will get out of their Champions League group. I think PSG showed that their frailties, as good as they are in terms of the players up front, but I think they'll get out of their group with Napoli, albeit, you know, a difficult one. But yeah, it'll be the league. It has to be the league. You know, this is an amazing chance for Liverpool now, as good as Manchester City are. And I think Klopp won't admit it, but I think priority has to be the league.
I don't know how you prioritise, really, especially this time of year. I mean, obviously, if you're in the Champions League, you
which
can't...
would they want more? Which would they want more? Which means more to the club?
I think in the heart of hearts, I think it will be the Premier League, because it's been such a long time. I think once you get back and become your domestic champions, I think that's a big thing for them. Obviously, the Champions League is... We've won it 5 times in the final last year. They've done incredibly well. The history is known. I think it's 28 years now in the league, 29 years it will be. That's too long for a club of Liverpool stature. It has to be the league. But you can't prioritise. I think it was Gary Neville who said you should kick the Champions League into touch. How do you do that? I'm not quite sure how that happens. Maybe later in the season you can think, well, actually, you know, if they're ahead in the Premier League and they've got an incredibly difficult Champions League tie and they're down, maybe then they'll play a weakened team in the second leg. But that's the only way you can prioritise. You can't prioritise at this time of season.
This time next week, if Chelsea, we'll be at West Ham today.
Yep.
West Ham, Chelsea. If Chelsea win today, they'll go into that fixture next weekend at Stamford Bridge with 100% records. But of course, we'll be sat around this table, and there will be a change to that. How will they cope when someone eventually stops them? It might not be Chelsea next week. It might be the week after. But someone eventually will take a point or all 3 off Liverpool. How would they adjust then? Because at the moment, all they know is winning.
Well, I don't think that will come. I mean, you know, I think there is resilience. I think if it was a flash in the pan, but we've seen this build, haven't we? As we say, we've seen the squad build. We've seen, you know, you can imagine the belief building. This isn't just something that suddenly arrived out of nowhere. You've got a coach who's hugely experienced. You've got players now who, there is a sense of conviction about them. So I don't think, you know, there are going to be upsets along the way. They've got City to come pretty soon after. So. There's a couple of big games. They may drop points. They will drop points sooner rather than later. But I think, I think there is a resilience, and there is an adaptability about them, and a depth. That's the key thing, depth.
Also need to mention James Milner here. I mean, at the start of the season, we're looking at that team, and he has been their best player, and I think that shows you. What a fantastic... I think he's a really undervalued player, always has been, wasn't appreciated enough with England, yet whoever he's played for, every single manager was always singled him out, and even now at his age, he's proven to be such an influence on the pitch, but off the pitch as well.
And carries himself well,
absolutely, he looks after himself, and I think he deserves a lot of credit. I think he's getting credit from
exactly.
Klopp, of course.
You're playing PSG and everyone, Neymar and Mbappe, and as you say, everyone's raving about Milner. I mean, I'm sure whether Gareth Southgate will even try and make that call, I doubt. But
you're desperate for that. You mentioned that last night, didn't you?
What's that? Did I? Yeah, well, you see him play, and
It's
who wouldn't?
just the second time in 12 hours.
But why?
That's, it's not England aren't exactly spoilt for choice, are we? So if you're Gareth Southgate watching that, you're thinking, who is the best informed English midfield player at the moment? It's James Milner.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of love that's traded around the Premier League for various managers and coaches from time to time. Well, from week to week, I think we should probably say here. It goes from Mourinho to Pochettino. Is the man of the moment Klopp? Is he the manager that everybody would love to work under and love to just have a little bit more experience of day to day, have a bit more understanding of what he's really like to work with?
Well, what's really interesting is you see sort of obviously fans of other clubs get very angry if certain managers get very good press, and obviously Pochettino's had a very good press. But people forget the fact that you're dealing with a person, sort of face to face. You're dealing with him in terms of how he reacts to you, it's like any sort of relationship you have with anyone. If somebody treats you in a decent way and is actually quite engaging and quite interesting and actually kind of seems to actually enjoy the process a little bit, you obviously will fundamentally be more warm towards them. If they then, beyond that, are a very good manager, doing a very good job, and their team play very good football, which is very important as well to me, then obviously they're going to get a good press. And you go to Liverpool now, and it's a good experience all round. The all-round experience of dealing with Liverpool is good. The access to the players is quite good. The manager is engaging. The team is playing good football. The atmosphere is good. So fundamentally, you're onto a winner straight away, aren't you? Obviously, that can change. None of us are sort of that easily won over. But actually, as a package, yes, of course, it's fantastic to go to Liverpool, and he deserves the credit he's getting, because people will argue that yes, they've spent an awful lot of money, but he's grown that club in the last couple of years to this point where they can then go for it in the way that the Fenway Sports Group have gone for it. And why not? People will say he's got to win something this year. You can't say to any manager you've got to win something. What you've got to be is competitive. And you've got to be in the latter stages of competitions. You've got to get into finals and semi-finals and be in the top 2 or 3. That's what you can say to them, and hopefully then win something. And I think they will do that this year. Yeah.
How Klopp has been... We saw him at Tottenham last weekend. Obviously, big win for them last weekend at Wembley. Probably gave him another lift, some more confidence after that victory. Klopp's not talking about the title, though. Is there any way, after 6 wins, 7 wins, 8, 9, 10... with the record that Liverpool have got, that it becomes unavoidable for him?
I think he'll try and keep a lid on it, but look, you can't fool anyone. That.
So what is his game? What is his game then?
They're going to win the title. The players, that group of players, think they can win the title. Of course, that's the only way they're going to have any chance of doing that. So he may not publicly come out with it, but every day that team are going to Melwood and they're preparing for every game in the belief that getting to May they can win the title, get to the Champions League final again and be in Madrid. And, Klopp has given the players the belief. I think he's quite tough to work for. I know he's always smiling in press conferences. Yeah. But, behind that, I think it is a bit of a mask at times, because he's tough and he demands a lot from players. And I think sometimes we do see him smiling a lot. But I think it's a bit different when each morning at the training ground there. Yeah,
a lot of intensity, but he's certainly getting results out of his players, because Liverpool, they've won all 6 Premier League games. They won against Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League. They are top of the Premier League as things stand. OK, next up in part 2, we're going to talk about this man. He's back, Sir Alex Ferguson at Old Trafford. Yesterday, good news from them off the pitch. On it, not so good. They drew with Wolves. More on that next. OK, let's talk about this man first. Sir Alex Ferguson, welcome return to him at Old Trafford yesterday. Rapturous reception, and quite rightly so, from the Manchester United supporters. It's been a long time since they've seen him, and certainly looking like he's recovering from a big setback back in March.
Yeah.
Good to see him back in the stands, though, Jason. Yes, we'll get on to Mourinho and the performance of of the Manchester United team against Wolves yesterday, but all the same, it is great to see Ferguson back in the stands.
It's a wonderful moment. I think obviously we feared that we'd never see this happen, and he looks the picture of health. He looks fantastic. He looks like he's made a great recovery, and then obviously to come back for his first game yesterday, the club appealed for the supporters to be in their seats early, and they did that, and he got the reception he deserved from the supporters, and it's just wonderful news for him and for his family and for Manchester United.
Yeah, it certainly is. Great recovery, because of course surgery back in May. It's now September. Back in the stands to watch his beloved Manchester United but they drew yesterday with Wolves, and it wasn't the performance that Mourinho was demanding, and the performance that, given the way they played in the Champions League in the week, when they were ruthless and they punished young boys.
Yeah.
This is a completely different Manchester United performance. Why are they so inconsistent?
That's a great question. I mean, they just almost seem to take one step forward, two step backwards. And obviously yesterday after the game, Mourinho was very cutting in his criticism, talked about attitude, talked about the players being at 30%, and he couldn't do that against a good side. We all suspected that Wolverhampton Wanderers would go there and give it a go and attack Manchester United, so they should have been prepared and ready for it. I don't think the Champions League game is an excuse. He's got a strong enough squad, he made changes, and as you say, they had a very comfortable victory. It should have been, a momentum-building victory off the back of beating Watford and so on. And then they go into the game like that, and they probably would have lost but for David De Gea, and I think that to have a team come to Old Trafford, newly promoted team, and basically dominate in that way, create more clear-cut chances than Manchester United, is not acceptable. I always worry when a manager talks about attitude, about the players' attitude, because he's the one who sets the tone for attitude, the manager of any football club. So if the players are being criticised for their attitude, then the buck stops with the manager. If he can't get them to have the right attitude for the right games, you've got to say he's got to be the one taking responsibility for that, because he sets the tone and he creates that atmosphere. So really, I think he should be criticising himself more. He seems to want to take an awful lot of credit for when things go well, and he doesn't seem to take much blame when they don't go well. And I think that's not necessarily a very healthy sign. We've always seen that from him, but we're seeing it more and more.
They're 8 points off Liverpool after 6 games. Is that alarming?
I mean, they're not out of the title race, obviously. It's September, but it's already it'd be a big call. I'm not sure how many Man United fans really believe there's any chance they can finish above Liverpool this season. It needs a big change. It needs a change for Mourinho. I mean, it just... I was at Watford last week and it was encouraging, but equally De Gea saved them at the end. He's done it again yesterday. And, I do worry about Mourinho. Is he going to be there at the end of the season? Is he going to be... I'm not sure he'll be manager of them this time next year. It might be a small thing, but I'm still... It's just very odd that he still lives in a hotel. I know it's often brought up, but I think that's a fundamental problem, that a manager doesn't want to live in a city in terms of, like most normal people would be renting. To live in a hotel, I think, sends the wrong message out to players. And, that's not the reason why they drew with Wolves yesterday, of course. But it's not a healthy situation, and I think most United fans can see that.
Matt, I'm going to take you back to 2007, because I looked at Mourinho's record the season that he got sacked by Chelsea in 2007 after the Rosenborg draw at Stamford Bridge. They drew the game before. Before that, there was 4 or 5 wins at the start of it. If you actually look at the record of Chelsea, the season that he got sacked in 2017, they sacked him for that. It's 1 or 2 defeats in the opening 10 games of the season. But ever since that moment, we have followed Mourinho's career, and his future seems to be determined based on every single result. And even yesterday, they drew 1-1 at home to Wolves. OK, it's not a good enough result, it's certainly not a good enough performance. But our attention immediately focuses on, is this guy going to stick around? Is he really the right man for the job? Does he want to live in Manchester? Does he want to stick around? Is this really his team? The blame game begins. Why is that based on every single result that Mourinho ever has?
Well, I don't think it's that. I mean, he's had huge successes since then as well. But I think at United, it's been the idea of a fit. Does he fit Manchester United? The previous board decided that he didn't. They were. There was a lot of discussion about him a few years before, and it was like, is Mourinho doesn't fit our pattern of youth football. He doesn't fit our pattern of the way we sort of play the game, and they were reluctant to touch him. Then it came round again, and Ed Woodward felt they had to dive in with him because he was their best chance after in the post-Ferguson slump. He was their best chance of getting back, at least up there. And there's been that was a very pragmatic decision, but it's been I don't think Mourinho will ever feel the love of United fans the way he'd like to, in the same way that I'm not sure he ever did at Real Madrid. I think he's fundamentally thrives on being a sort of underdog manager, and I don't think you ever quite get that at United. And I just don't think, he's not. He got them up to second last year. He can say that he's fulfilled a big part of the bargain, but I just think the way he talks as well, the way there's a constant antagonism, I think encourages the idea that whether he's there for the long haul, we know he generally doesn't do more than a few seasons anyway. So I think it's, you know, the way he talks, the way he doesn't really feel like a completely Mourinho team, doesn't, you know, the lack of intensity, something like yesterday when you just think, that's not a Mourinho team. You go back to the Chelsea team you're talking about, you knew what they were going to deliver almost every game. You just felt, right, that's exactly how he does it. You know, the positioning of players, the intensity of players, you could see how choreographed it was. With this United team, you know, you turn up week to week and it's very different performances. It lurches around. Yeah.
One of those players I think we can talk about, Alexis Sánchez. What's going on with him? Because when Mourinho signed him, don't worry, don't panic.
This would be
next season. He'll be the best player.
And it's not like he went to the World Cup either. So he had that whole summer and we thought, well, OK, fine. You know, he's had the adjustment period of going into a different club mid-season. You can cut a player some slack for that, although I think if you're a player of the stature of Alexis Sánchez and what you've achieved in the game, you should have hit the ground running, really, going to Manchester United. Didn't do that last season. He has the same sort of body language he had at Arsenal. You know, he just doesn't look happy to me. He doesn't look like he's comfortable in the team. He doesn't look like he knows quite what his role is in the team. Doesn't look like he kind of fits into the team, really, in the way that he's playing. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm struggling to remember a performance that he's put in for Manchester United since he's been there. And a player...
Where should he play? What is his position? Because we know that he's played across every position, every forward-thinking position on the pitch. Where is his best position? If he one-on-one with Mourinho in an office said, OK, where do you want to play?
I think he seems to me to enjoy more when he's playing through the middle. When he's played for Chile through there, in that position, he's played extremely well. But Chile playing a different way from Manchester United. But I think off the flank, off the left flank is probably his best option, really, in terms of actually where he fits into the team. The problem, I think, is obviously I don't think Manchester United needed somebody out there. You know, they needed somebody more in the middle to create for them. But I think he would probably say more of a central role. Most players tend to crave that when they're put out wide anyway. But it just doesn't look like it's... What's the fit? What's the role for him? Why was he acquired apart from stopping him going to Manchester City? It didn't look like, to me, it was like a reactive signing. It's like, we're going to stop him going somewhere else. We'll do this deal. We'll get him in. He's a big superstar. He'll work for us. And going back to the point that Matt's made, I mean, what's the team? What is the team identity? What's the team trying to achieve? What is the team being built around? It doesn't look like it's a Mourinho team. It doesn't look like, you know, that team is a team that he would assemble, you know, but actually most of the signings have been his. I mean, he can't argue against that, you know, and I think that it seems to me he's struggling with a fundamental problem in that football has moved on since the 2007, 2004, 2005, when he was the dominant figure in European football, Jose Mourinho, for several years. He set the template for European football. He set the template for the way you won. Now that template is not working. It doesn't work anymore. You've got to be more attractive, more attacking. You've got to be Guardiola-like, Klopp-like. You've got to be that sort of manager. And he struggles with that because it's fundamentally not what his nature is. His nature is not to lose, to try and win, rather than go out to try and win.
I think I think it's a fascinating discussion. I do think all tactics should be just... I think it's still possible to play, you know, top-class counter-attacking football. The way, you know, he's always been a risk-averse manager. He's always been, you know, guaranteed 6-7 players behind the ball as soon as you lose it. You know, they always knew exactly where they should be. Tactical fouls up the... I mean, I think it's possible for all of that to work. But it's not going to work if you've got Lukaku, who's, you know, literally veers from 4 out of 10 to 8 out of 10. If Pogba, you know, world-class player, veers from 4 out of 10 to 8 out of 10. Sanchez, you know, stays around about 5. You know, but these are key potential world-class players whose form is lurching around, and that's, you know, whether that's individual or because, as Jason says, this team does not have a basic structure where we know what we're about. We know what the pattern is, and that's the weird thing for a coach who was brilliant at setting a pattern. That's the weirdest thing about United, is that there is no pattern.
There was another team on the pitch yesterday, and that's Wolves, and we should give them credit. They've got 9 points. They're they look as though they're comfortable with the environment. They're thriving in it. They're enjoying life in the Premier League. What have they got? They've clearly got the bond that they developed last season under their Portuguese head coach. That's clearly continued this season under him. But what is it that's special for them?
They've got a great manager, and a manager again who's very demanding. I think last season some of the moans from other clubs in the Championship about saying that it's not right that Wolves weren't spending enough, and they were sort of trying to criticise the relationship with Mendes and the owners. But he did a great job last year. It was a bit of a myth that they were all, Portuguese players coming in. He had a sort of a good spine, a sort of a British spine with that flair. And, he demanded a lot. I mean, it was an interesting point, end of last season, once they got promotion and the players, obviously, celebrating. He then ramped up their training schedules, got rid of all their days off. Yeah. And the players couldn't believe it because they got into the Premier League. But he was making a real point, like, the hard work starts here. And their toughest training sessions were once they actually got promotion. Mm-hmm. And it was a real sort of, notice to the team. And there's no doubt that Wolves are going to stay in the Premier League. They're a great addition. I love going to Molineux. Good atmosphere. And there's every reason why they'll finish in the top 10, certainly mid-table, and kick on. And obviously the dream with the owners is to challenge for the title. And when you look at their wealth, there is no reason to suggest why in a few years that might not be possible. They've
got big ambitions. Of course, the head coach Nuno is clearly a catch. They want to build a bigger stadium. They believe that they can fill a bigger stadium. Does Wolves have that kind of potential?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think they do, and I think it's interesting that Ferguson bought them because, obviously, what sort of football club do you buy? If you've got wealth and you've got ambition, what sort of football club do you buy? If you try and buy a big Premier League club, it's going to cost you billions, hundreds of millions and billions. So buy a Championship club with potential. So I mean, you look at Wolves, you look at Leeds, you look at clubs like that where they've got big, huge fan bases, big catchment areas, big areas where they can actually develop, and you think, well, actually, there's potential there to grow. So you get that team back into the Premier League, suddenly it's a much more valuable proposition straight away. The link with George Mendes is fascinating, but it's not unusual. I think he's closer perhaps to Wolves than some agents are, but Nuno wouldn't be there without him. Some of the players wouldn't be there without him. But it's not as if they've, Ruben Neves is an interesting player because everyone says, oh, Ruben Neves has gone to, why has he gone to Wolves? He was offered around. Mm-hmm. It wasn't, the other clubs were offered him, but Wolves took him. Obviously George Mendes is his agent, he's Nuno's agent. The relationship is close, but we've seen this before at countless clubs where that's how it's happened. The players have been placed in or put into clubs by agents who've got strong relationships with the clubs and with the managers. It's not unusual. Obviously, George Mendes did an awful lot of Chelsea with Jose Mourinho first time round. We see it all the time. But I think you're absolutely right. The potential there is great. I look at them and I think if Leeds do a similar sort of scenario and get up, you could see them doing the same sort of thing. I think they'll comfortably finish top 10. But above everything, it's the style of football I like. You go to Manchester United and you attack them. You take them on. And it goes back to the point I was making before. And I think football has moved on. And I think you have to be more bold and you have to be more aggressive and more attacking. And I think a team like Wolverhampton Wanderers coming up and playing in that fashion has set the tone for what you should be doing when you come into the Premier League.
Yeah, certainly they've certainly been a welcome addition to the Premier League. Good result for Wolves yesterday, drawing 1-1 at Manchester United under their progressive head coach Nuno. OK, next up, we're going to talk Tottenham. Charlie was down on the South Coast yesterday to see them beat Brighton. We'll talk more about Prickly Poch. That's coming up. That's next. Welcome back with us this morning, Matt Dickinson, Charlie Wyatt and Jason Burt. OK, let's just remind you what's in the papers. For once on this programme, we start with some good news. The Sunday Times this morning, reflecting on Sir Alex Ferguson back in the stands yesterday at his beloved Manchester United. They drew 1-1 with Wolves. Jose Mourinho not happy with his side. They only gave 30%, only playing at 30% of their capability. He lets rip, according to the Mail on Sunday this morning. Newcastle facing a probe. Yesterday, a bottle thrown at one of the Crystal Palace players during their 0-0 draw at Selhurst Park. Back of the Sunday, people read raw. Mourinho not happy. I don't like my team, don't like the look of my team after that performance. Better at the top of the table, though. Man City, Aguero scoring 5-0 yesterday. Manchester City won at Cardiff. Salah on the score sheet as well for Liverpool. Big win for them, 3-0 against Southampton. Sam Wallace. We sometimes talk about men in suits. We're going to talk about them in part 5 today. Ivan Gazidis, Sam's column, Arsenal. They wouldn't expect to lose a player to AC Milan, but they have lost their CEO. Mark Irwin's column as well in The Sun this morning. He talks about Ivan Gazidis. He leaves in December for Milan. He talks about the Arsenal obsessives in this column who tweet about the outstanding CV of the man who's going to replace Ivan Gazidis, that man Vinay Venkatesham. We'll talk about that in part 5 of today's programme. Andy Dunn's column this morning on Manchester City. Not many turned up in midweek for the Champions League defeat against Lyon, but all the City fans who did turn up, all they care about are the medals in May. We'll talk about them in a moment, but first up we're going to talk Tottenham, Charlie, because you're on the South Coast yesterday. What have you made of Pochettino's behaviour over the last... Let's take last weekend's performance against Liverpool into account at Wembley Stadium, then into the Champions League against Inter Milan, the decision to leave Kieran Trippier, Toby Alderweireld at home, his response in the press conference. Jamie Weir from Sky asked him about that decision. Pochettino accused him of a lack of respect for the players who were with him in that defeat. Of course, they threw that game away in the last 5-6 minutes of that game in the San Siro. And then yesterday, when of course they needed to win, and they did go and win.
Well, yeah, he was certainly in a better mood after yesterday's game, and it was strange behaviour from Pochettino, because he's one of those managers that before games, at his sort of pre-match press conferences at the training ground, he always speaks very well, in front of the cameras. Then sort of the written media, we get 10-15 minutes with him. And then after matches, he's more closed, he's sort of still in the zone. You rarely get anything particularly explosive out of him after a match. Other managers often go the other way. So it was a surprise. He's obviously felt the pressure, isn't he, or feeling the pressure. Very, very bad week, very bad couple of weeks for him. So I think, the journalists at that match had every right to ask about some curious team selections, and the fact that he used leaving them at home for technical reasons. Every right to ask that question. So I don't think Pochettino covered himself in glory, made himself look a bit silly, but equally important win yesterday, a deserved win. They very nearly messed it up at the end. Harry Kane, we spoke to him afterwards for tomorrow's papers. 3 goals in 6 games. So even though everyone's talking about his performances, there are lots of strikers in the Premier League that would be more than happy with 3 goals from 6 games. So it's been a tough couple of weeks. I think over the next few weeks, Tottenham will settle down. Obviously a very odd match for them on Wednesday at home to Watford in Buckinghamshire, MK Dons. So I think Dele Alli's looking forward to that one, of course. But yeah, I think Tottenham will be fine. I still think they'll be top 4, really pushing hard for it. I think they'll struggle to challenge Man City and Liverpool.
A few people made the point after Poch said the players have been left home for tactical reasons, and his little outburst in the San Siro after that defeat against Inter. The managers, in our experience, they always crave the technical questions, don't they? Yeah. Tactics, team selection, choices, transfers. Those are the questions that they would prefer that we ask, rather than what's happening with Mourinho, are you about to get sacked? All those questions. When Pochettino was asked one, which we all feel, I think, on this table was a legitimate question. Do we?
Yeah.
All agree?
Absolutely. Yeah,
well, we
100%,
think it was.
100%.
Why would he say it isn't?
Because they don't like being asked those questions. That's why.
It's not the first time.
They like being asked those questions. It's not the first time he said that
to a journalist.
No, they like being asked those questions when they won. They don't like being asked those questions when they lose, or even pre-match. They don't like being asked those questions. We've all been in press conferences where we've asked those questions, and the manager's very dismissive. He just brushes it aside. I'm not going into that, or I'm not talking about that. I absolutely agree with you. I even had it the other day. I won't name the manager, but I know he complained afterwards that he wasn't asked about the game, about the technical side of the game. So when we do, they close it down. They don't go into. They just brush it off and say any platitudes or whatever. They won't go into the depth. We crave the depth as well. We want to know why they set up the team in that way. How are they going to approach the game, or why did they approach the game in that way? We need that information as well. All of us, whoever we work for, we want that information as well. Beyond obviously the personality stuff and the headline stuff. Of course, we want as much information as we can get. They don't want to engage.
But I think what you're driving
at is the idea that this kind of you haven't played the game, you've got no right to ask me sort of thing. I think that's what a lot of them do fundamentally feel. Sorry, you were going to say.
No, but we've all been in press conferences as well where we've been sat down with a manager for 15, 20 minutes talking endlessly about everything else apart from the game, and then a press officer or a communications director sat alongside a manager says, any questions about the game, fellas?
Yeah, Yeah, no.
We've all been there.
We've all been there, and often...
But is that yeah?
Often that happens, though, Neil, when we haven't got 15 or 20 minutes, when you've got 7 or 8 minutes. That's often the case. Some managers will keep their press conferences extremely short, brief, and you've got to try and get as much quick information as quickly as possible out of them to try and write your pieces. If you've got longer, then we can go more in depth. Yeah, it's a legitimate response for them to say sometimes we don't ask about the specific game. But again, I've been in press conferences where you do ask about the specific game. Oh, I'm not talking about that. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about him. I don't want to talk... Sometimes I've been in scenarios where you do feel like saying to them, can you tell me what you do want to talk about? Because it would be quite helpful for us to know what you want to talk about here as well, because, we're not quite sure where we're going with all of this.
Themselves?
Sorry?
Themselves?
Well, exactly. You wonder what... obviously, I always wonder with managers. I never understand with managers. A press conference is a manager's press conference. It's his press conference. He owns the press conference. He can go in there and get across whatever message he wants about whatever thing he wants to talk about. Some managers seem to go in there with the idea that I'll give them nothing, they'll go away and I'll be happy. It don't work like that. You should use the opportunity to talk and get your message across and think about what you're trying to say.
Well, that's why they'll slag off the referee, isn't it? That's the easiest thing, is it? I don't want to spend too much time picking a side, why did I picked him or why those tactics. I'll blame the referee for that decision, and then that saves all those tricky questions.
Yeah, you're entitled to ask, surely, about... certainly, pre-match, you're entitled to ask, where's Alderweireld?
No, absolutely.
They're both on the pitch. They were both on the pitch.
It's a guy who's lost a few games, who's just in a bad mood, and because it's him, it made more headlines because we're not used to it. We're not used to him snapping like that. We're used to it from others. We've spent enough time talking about Jose probably, but it's just from, as Charlie says, it's from a guy who isn't normally like that, and you lose a few games. Any manager, they've had a tricky time. The stadium is obviously a mess. He didn't kick up at all about not signing any players in the summer, but we still wonder we talked about Liverpool at the start and the resources and the depth. Tottenham have gone a very different way, and I have sympathy for him in the sense that the talk of crisis, or as Pochettino sort of losing his way. That strikes me as ridiculous. The guy is a top class manager. If Man United need a new manager come next summer, I would have put Pochettino right near the top of the list. I don't think, even if Tottenham have a bumpy season, which they may well do, they may well struggle to get into the top 4. I don't think that suddenly removes Pochettino from that list, far from it.
I don't know if he was asked about this yesterday, Charlie, but Carl Walker's interview with Ian Ladyman, excellent piece yesterday, talking about his life in football, so with Manchester City, with England, but he also was asked about Pochettino and the comments Pochettino made about him in his book, and the moment that Pochettino said, actually, you can leave, you're not part of my plans. They both got very different accounts of what actually happened in that meeting, but the principal point, I think, is that Carl Walker wasn't happy that what Carl Walker thought was a private meeting between them then became very public when Pochettino wrote about it in his book. Should Pochettino be careful about what he exposes himself to? And where?
I think, obviously, as Kyle Walker said in that excellent interview, how surprised he was, and in his eyes, and I don't think he's alone, Pochettino's broken sort of a code, an unwritten code there that what goes on in the manager's office stays there. Obviously, that's not the case. Pochettino wasn't asked about that yesterday. I didn't speak to Pochettino, so I was with Harry Kane in sort of the player area.
That. I was thinking if you had been, you would have asked.
So, absolutely. But
it was get out of jail free card there, Charlie.
Yeah, exactly. But Walker's clearly really, really upset by that, and he was quite adamant. And those quotes were really believable as well.
What impressed me about that piece is that clearly after Kyle Walker had second thoughts about it, there was a discussion that took place with Ian Ladyman, and then in the end they said, actually, that's what I believe, that's what I said, print it, which is exactly what the man did.
That's what you want from players, isn't it? That's what we crave for, is honesty. And, sometimes you speak to a player and a manager and, you've got the quotes, but you know that half of it they don't necessarily believe, or things are leaving out. So it was great that a player sits down and is comfortable enough in his skin, and of course the stuff about even though it was obvious, and he hinted we spoke about it at the World Cup in terms of not really wanting to play in central defence. Again, he revisited that really good, honest stuff.
Just finally, does Pochettino get an easy ride from the media? Mourinho last week,
Yeah.
Watford lose against Manchester United. Mourinho smirks his way through a TV interview and says, well, you know, everyone focuses on us when we're losing games, but Tottenham have lost twice in a row now. That was the game against Liverpool last weekend in the lunchtime kick-off. By then, of course, Manchester United in the evening went and won at Watford. He said, well, you know, it's their turn now. Go, they're in the firing line, crack on with them.
Yeah, I don't think he gets an easy ride at all.
You don't?
I know. I think he's done a terrific job with, by far, the smallest budget of those top clubs. You know, quite a long way behind everyone else. He's made them into a very serious proposition. Champions League club. He's dealt with all the issues around the club, the stadium, and everything as best he can. And he plays attractive football. I keep going back to that point, you know, and I think he's done extremely well. The criticism of him, obviously, is he's not won a trophy. That will hang around for him for a long time until he does win a trophy. I think a lot of it's quite harsh. But no, I don't think he gets an easy ride. I think Mourinho's in a different situation. At Manchester United, they should be winning trophies. They should be contenders far more often than Tottenham Hotspur. But I think I wouldn't criticise him. No, I think he gets the press he deserves in terms of the kind of way people talk about him and the sort of warm words he receives and so on. I think he deserves it.
Yeah, OK. Important win for them yesterday down at Brighton. Just want a quick word on Manchester City and the Champions League as well. Big win for them yesterday at Cardiff, winning 5-0 in the Premier League. But the Champions League, for some reason, their supporters just don't seem to, or the club, the supporters, the mood, the atmosphere around the club, the stadium on match days, they just don't seem to take to the Champions League. What is it about City and the Champions League, Dicko?
Well, it was awful in midweek, wasn't it? It was one of the flattest occasions I can remember, especially when you'd been at Anfield the night before, which was so buzzing. Good question. I think there could be a few causes. I mean, obviously, you know, some fans will say it's the simple expense of paying for it on top. I do wonder that City get less of the floating. Well, I think, you know, United do attract a certain sort of, you know, if there are tickets going, a tourist crowd that go there in the way that City, I don't think, do. So I think that may be a factor. I think they haven't got, there's a craving to win it, but I don't think they've got quite maybe the heritage with it. Maybe that plays on some minds, but it shouldn't be a factor because I think ultimately they should get to the next, they should get into the knockout games, and when it's knockout games, it should be fantastic. But it is weird turning up at a game like Wednesday to start the campaign. This is a year when we think City can, maybe even should win the Champions League, and you just sort of, where's the buzz?
And because I think back to Chelsea and their obsession with winning, and City have made it clear, there's no bones about it, they want to win the Champions League. Think back to Chelsea and that obsession they had under Abramovich until they finally did win it with Roberto Di Matteo in charge. But the circumstances, they had this almost pathological desire to go to win it, and that's what City have got. But for some reason, some of their fans aren't behind them.
And it's weird because they're both very different clubs in terms of support base, aren't they? That's the thing. Chelsea are a growing club, and there was a period where they weren't selling out all their Champions League games a while back. Now they do sell out all their games. Manchester City very different in that. I remember going to some of their games in what is now League One, and their support was unbelievable. And there's not many clubs that would have been getting their gates that they were. And I remember going to a game at Stockport, and they were hopeless. But they stuck.
Derby.
So it was a derby that they never expected to have, so you can't say that fan base has always been extraordinary. It's always been there, so it is quite different to Chelsea. So that's why I'm really surprised that they're not selling out. Equally, there's reasons there. They've got an issue with UEFA and Europe, and so I think you have to respect that.
Yeah, sure. OK. That's Man City still getting to grips with the Champions League. They're pretty handy in the Premier League, though. Big win for them yesterday, 5-0 at Cardiff. OK, next up, we're going to talk about the FIFA Awards. Modric, Ronaldo and Salah on the shortlist. Where, though, is Eden Hazard? More on him next. You're watching the Sunday Supplement. Next up, after us, of course, is Goals on Sunday. Let's find out what Ben and Cammy are up to.
Morning all, morning Neil.
Morning.
Got an interesting show lined up for you today. Plenty to talk about. Loads of goals yesterday, Kevin.
Loads and loads of goals, but we've got David Moyes on, and they have talked about David Moyes for donkey's years on that show.
Haven't they just? But we're going to be hearing from the donkey himself. I can't necessarily call him a donkey, can I, before he comes on?
Not. That'll be the headlines tomorrow in one of their papers, don't worry.
David Moyes will be joining us when we're live at about 11 o'clock, so hopefully you'll be there then.
Donkey. He's had worse than that. He's had worse than that from the papers, hasn't he, David Moyes?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's have a quick chat about David. What's next for him? He did an interview last weekend, didn't he? When he said that he didn't want to leave West Ham, that he saw a big future there, that he wanted to be a part of it, that he wanted to invest in the team, to improve the team. Of course, they went a different way with Manuel Pellegrini. But what's next for David Moyes? Bearing in mind, he's on the site. He may well be watching this in the green room, and he's on goals on Sunday next. And they still want their one and only guest to be sat on that sofa. Just be careful.
I've got time for David Moyes. I mean, I think he ran into a lot of the classic West Ham dysfunction last season. I mean, it's interesting. Pellegrini seems to have been given a degree of control that David Moyes would have killed for. I mean, when he was there, a lot of interference, a lot of meddling with transfers, what players he could do, couldn't do, and you know that became almost impossible. I mean, I think he would like to have stayed as a club, as we know, with potential, but it wasn't quite unmanageable for him. But it was heading that way, and they give it to someone very different, give him a completely different set of control, completely different budget. And at the moment it's looking pretty bumpy. So, the idea that there was always going to be an instant upgrade on David Moyes isn't looking quite so simplistic.
No, sure. We finally did get a result last weekend, of course, up at Everton. We'll talk about West Ham and Chelsea because that's the game of the day in a few minutes' time. But it is the FIFA Awards tomorrow night, London's Festival Hall. Ronaldo has won the first two. Cristiano Ronaldo won the first two awards, the first 2 years of it. This is the third year. Modric, Ronaldo, Mo Salah on the shortlist. Who has been the best player in the world?
It has to be Modric. And in these sort of seasons, you have to combine and look at what they did in their domestic leagues, and particularly Europe, and of course the World Cup. Now, Ronaldo, I don't think played very well in the Champions League final. And he, despite his attempts after the game to make it all about him, when he sort of hinted at the fact that he was going to leave, I thought Modric played really well. Did Ronaldo have a great World Cup? OK. Luka Modric helped his team, remarkably to the final. Salah, of course, was outstanding for Liverpool. Was always going to have find it tough at the World Cup. So it's Modric all day long for me. Fantastic player, brilliant season.
If you read the extracts in the Times yesterday in Kevin Keegan's book,
yeah.
Tony Jimenez, who was at Newcastle when they could have signed Luka Modric, might not agree with that, or he certainly wouldn't have done at the time.
Yeah, amazing story. Yeah, for those that didn't see, yes, Kevin Keegan thinks he's done the deal, gets the agent into the room, pretty much ready to get the deal signed, and Tony Jimenez, in his wisdom, says, he's not physical enough for the Premier League, and that tells you a lot about Newcastle and the mess that Mike Ashley's presided over. But yeah, I'm with Charlie in the sense of you couldn't possibly dispute if it is Modric. I think I think there's an argument to be had, and I thought in terms of the World Cup, Hazard was actually pretty fantastic and up there, deserves to be in the conversation. But if Modric is up there getting the prize tomorrow, I'll be thinking fair enough. And also I like to see a slightly different type of player. I mean, he's more of a schemer. We're used to the Messi Ronaldo show, and obviously there's that highlights reel, but actually Modric is such a beautiful player to watch. There's a sort of elegant simplicity to his game, and he's a sort of he leads his team, but in a very understated way. And I just think that's
quite dignified, yeah. Apart from when he was quite critical of England and before or after the World Cup semi-final, wasn't he? Is he? If I think of those types of players, Jason, down the years, I'd automatically probably look at Iniesta, Xavi.
Yeah.
Is Modric in that class, or is he ahead?
I don't know about ahead, but he's definitely in that class.
Really?
Yeah, I think he's up there with them, and we've seen the last year in particular. How you disagree? No,
I don't know.
You don't think he's quite as good? Do you think he's better?
I need convincing. I've seen Iniesta score some big goals for Barcelona.
That's the one criticism you've got of him. He doesn't score. He doesn't
intense moments at the highest level. With the pressure really on, think of Chelsea-Barcelona, that time at Stamford Bridge, Iniesta's equaliser, World Cup final.
The criticism of him is he doesn't score goals. He doesn't score enough goals. But I've seen enough games where he's controlled the games, and obviously I did a lot of the Real Madrid campaign last season and the season before, and he was superb both those times. I think when they played the season before, Atletico Madrid away, he's controlled the whole game. Controlled the whole game, and we saw that in the World Cup as well. The importance of that sort of player. Naturally, I kind of like that sort of player, so I'm going to obviously gravitate towards him. One of the big debates in England is we don't produce that sort of player, and obviously going back to the Tony Jimenez story, that's probably partly why, because obviously I know he's Croatian coming in, but we don't seem to value them in that way. They don't seem to be coming through in England. If we had somebody like that in the England team, it would transform that team. So and I like the idea of a different sort of player winning it. I think there is that popularity contest, and it's a commercial thing with Ronaldo always being nominated. The shock this year is Messi's not nominated for the award, but I take your point, but I think he is up there with that sort of calibre of player.
Juventus, would you have signed Cristiano Ronaldo? There was a big piece in the Financial
Yeah,
Times.
there was two clear reasons why they signed him. One, commercial, absolutely 100% commercially. And
the worrying thing is you said commercially first before
exactly.
Before you said what
and
you're about to say.
That's what I wonder. That's what I do wonder. I think there is a real desire at Juventus to be one of the biggest clubs in the world. Obviously, on-field success follows on from that. They're going to win the Italian league probably anyway. They won it 7 years in a row. The second big thing is Champions League, and obviously there is an idea there that they have to win the Champions League. That takes them to a new sphere, both in terms of their status as a club, but also commercially as well. I do wonder sometimes when you're buying a 33-year-old player of his status, are you buying the commercial side of it first, or the player first? I guess the two have to be kind of working together when you're paying 100 million euros for somebody anyway at that age, and they probably will get their money back. But I wonder whether the commercial value almost outweighs the sort of playing value for them.
A new phenomenon, which I didn't realise, maybe you guys have got more experience than me of this, is in that Financial Times piece yesterday, which suggested that kids don't, or young kids don't support football clubs so much anymore. They follow footballers. So when Cristiano Ronaldo moves from Real Madrid to Juventus, that they instantly gained something like 10 million extra social media followers, because all the young kids who worship him, who idolise Cristiano Ronaldo, who try to replicate his overhead kick for Real Madrid against Juventus last season, that they automatically become Cristiano Ronaldo fans because he's at Juventus rather than Juventus supporters with Cristiano Ronaldo in the side.
I think that there has been a change, and that's the whole FIFA generation, isn't it? And we have to accept that a 12-year-old, 13-year-old's knowledge of football, world football,
it's
European football, is basically, yeah. But it's unbelievable. When we are sort of, at that age, in terms of watching football from outside England, where we might get the European Cup final and the Cup Winners' Cup final and the UEFA Cup final, that was pretty much it. And now that their knowledge goes beyond Ronaldo, they know about the Villarreal team, they know about the Napoli team, that they know about the Marseille team, they know
they know their players.
Yeah. But I think there is a team.
But so as a result, they have a strong affinity with those players, as you've just said, which is very different from what we have. I still think most youngsters still have a team.
If you talk about if you bring up Cristiano Ronaldo, do they automatically say, speed 76?
Yeah, I think
pace,
absolutely.
We're also
heading ability.
We're talking globally as well. Now. That's the difference.
Exactly.
The difference is that this is we're talking about this in China, which is all these clubs are craving. They've realised that there's so much boom still to come in areas like that, and that's part of it. It's putting yourself on the map in across the world, not just talking about your local audience or even the European audience. So it's about. Man United, we know they've got sponsors every corner of the globe. It's all about trying to monetise the entire project in every corner of the world, and how better to do that than to sign one of the world's most famous athletes.
Yeah, on £1 million a week, yeah. Maurizio Sarri talked last week, but Eden Hazard said he could be, or he's the best player in the world. Of course, he's not on this shortlist, but is he in that bracket? He doesn't perhaps have the profile. Of some of the it clearly doesn't have the same profile as Ronaldo, but everyone who watches him in the Premier League loves the way that he plays. He's stylish. He's got so much flair. He's got so much ability, goals, assists. He's got the lot. But is he in their bracket?
He's certainly got the ability, and I think there is that question mark. Does he have that ruthlessness to actually make himself one of the very, very best players in the world. We saw that at the World Cup. Charlie's right. I think he was definitely one of the best players at the World Cup. I think it's good that Sarri's challenging him in this way. I think it's good that he's challenging him to score 40 goals. Why shouldn't he? Why can't he? It's possible. I think these are the challenges that Hazard needs. I think, obviously, at the World Cup, he spoke about, maybe it's time for him to move on, and we know exactly what he was talking about there.
Yeah.
He was obviously hoping to go to Real Madrid. It didn't happen. And I can see why it didn't happen, because they're probably thinking we're not quite sure yet whether he's actually at the level that we want him to be at. But the clock is ticking. He's 26, 27, so he has to get on with it now. But he's definitely got that ability. Yeah. I think we need to see a little bit more consistency from him over a longer period of time, because he sometimes has seasons where he's brilliant and then a poor season after that, or a poor half season. Injuries have played a big part in that. But certainly, if you look at the Premier League in terms of pure ability, I wouldn't think there's anyone else better than him.
He's also become a lot more, I think, comfortable, confident. Even with his interviews, he's a very different person from 2-3 years ago, isn't he?
Yeah.
And I think as a result, that there's that on the pitch as well. You can tell. And I think next 2 or 3 years, I think he'll have that consistency, which, as you've said, maybe he's not always had.
Yeah, certainly Chelsea's most influential player, one of the Premier League's most influential players, no question about that. OK, next up, we're going to talk about men in suits rather than men in boots, which is the payoff line in Mark Owen's column this morning. Ivan Gazidis stepping away from Arsenal. He's resigned as the chief executive. He's taking over at Milan. We'll talk more about him. That's coming next in part 5.